Today, we're diving into a really tragic legal case that forces us to ask a tough question, one that gets more complicated every single day. When something goes terribly wrong, where does the responsibility truly lie?
So let's just imagine this for a second. A big company hires an outside expert, a contractor, for a very specific job. But during that job, that expert commits an awful crime. So who's on the hook? Is it just the criminal, or does the company that hired them bear some of the blame? This is the exact question the UK's Supreme Court had to tackle in a deeply disturbing case.
And the facts of this case, well, they're just awful. For about 16 years, from 1968 all the way to 1984, Barclays Bank made job applicants go through a medical exam. The doctor they sent everyone to used this as an opportunity to sexually assault more than 100 people. Now, the doctor himself passed away a long time ago, which left his victims with only one place to turn to seek justice: the bank that sent them to his office in the first place.
So how do you even begin to untangle a situation like this? Well, thankfully, the courts didn't have to start from scratch. They turned to a pretty established area of law, one designed for these exact kinds of messy situations, where the actions of one person might just become the legal problem of another.
It's a concept called vicarious liability. And in plain English, it's the reason a company can get sued if one of their delivery drivers gets into an accident while on the clock. I mean, the CEO didn't crash the van, right? But the company is still held responsible for what its employee does. But notice the key word I keep using: employee.
And this, right here, is the absolute heart of the problem. You see, the law draws a really sharp line between an employee, someone who's truly part of a business, and an independent contractor, who is basically their own boss. An employer controls how an employee does their job, so they're usually liable. But a contractor, they're in charge of their own work, and that means they're responsible for their own actions. So the billion-dollar question was, what was the doctor?
The Supreme Court looked at this and knew right away, okay, this doctor wasn't a traditional Barclays employee. He wasn't on the payroll. He had his own private practice. So they had to ask a much more nuanced question. Was his relationship with the bank so close to employment that the bank should still be responsible? And to figure that out, they used a very specific 5-point test.
Think of it like a checklist. First, who really benefits from the work? And do the company's business model itself create the risk of this terrible act happening? Second, was this person basically woven into the company's structure? Third, how much control did the company really have over how they did their job? Fourth, you got to follow the money. Who was paying them and how? Were they really in business for themselves? And finally, you just step back and ask, what does this whole relationship feel like? More like a boss and an employee, or a company and a vendor?
All right, so we have the test. Now for the moment of truth. How did the relationship between Barclays Bank and this doctor actually stack up when put through this 5-point legal filter? The answer would change everything.
Let's break down how the court saw it point by point. Sure, the bank benefited from the doctor's medical reports, but the court said the bank's business, banking, didn't create the specific risk of sexual assault. The doctor wasn't part of the bank's management structure or anything like that. And crucially, Barclays had zero control over how he conducted the medical exams. They couldn't tell him what to do. Financially, he was paid a fee for each exam, not a salary, and he was running his own independent practice.
And really, it was Lady Hale, the president of the Supreme Court, who just summed it all up perfectly. She said the question is simple: was the person who did the wrong thing running their own business, or were they basically an employee? And in this case, she said it was clear that the doctor was running his own business. And that was it. The final judgment came down. Despite the horrific abuse suffered by all those people, the law, as it's currently written, meant Barclays Bank could not be held legally responsible for the independent criminal acts of its contractor.
Now, you might think this is all just a sad legal case from decades ago, but this ruling sent shockwaves that are incredibly relevant today. It has huge implications for our modern economy and the way many of us work right now.
So what does this all mean for us? Well, a few big things. First, it draws that legal line in the sand between employees and contractors even thicker. This is a huge deal for the gig economy. You know all the companies built on armies of independent contractors, from ride-sharing to delivery apps? The ruling makes it crystal clear. A company isn't automatically on the hook for what a contractor does. And perhaps most importantly, it shows how difficult it can be for victims to get justice when the person who hurt them isn't working for a company, but just working with one.
And that really leaves us with a massive question, doesn't it? As the whole world of work keeps changing, as the lines between a full-time job and a temporary gig get blurrier and blurrier,
Are our old ideas of responsibility and risk still good enough? It's a debate that this case has made more urgent than ever.